What do you consider to be the primary catalyst of the recession? We gave people a number of choices, and feel free to add one yourself, but housing bubble, subprime mortgages, that's got a slight lead right now, 43%. Lack of consumer savings, government spending, Wall Street as a whole, or they're all equally responsible, which happens to be in second place. What would you say?
I would say, I didn't hear you say debt. It's debt. It's excessive debt by individuals, corporations, and government because of the illusions developed with an inflationary climate which is created by the Federal Reserve. We do a lot of things. We borrow too much money. Finally, debt overwhelms, and it overwhelms the consumer and the businessman and the system, and things come to a halt because it was an illusion to think that we were actually working hard and saving money, which we were not.
And let me stop you right there, because I was actually reading Glenn Beck's magazine, Fusion, where you have an article how the Fed caused the current crisis in his issue. So are you saying that it's Ben Bernanke and team, not necessarily Tim Geithner? Is it the central bank that you're referring to as potentially the heart of what's causing this crisis?
Or Alan Greenspan and team, for that matter.
Yeah, now that's the right comment. It's the central bank. And Bernanke has compounded the problems because he hasn't accepted a new concept of monetary policy. And Greenspan was a major player in this and responsible for a lot. But it's the system. It's actually started to develop in 1971 when the last linkage to gold was removed, and since then the Federal Reserve has been given license to inflate. And also they have had the privilege of doing it without any transparency. They are not obligated to tell us a thing. So we talk about how are we going to figure out who got the bonuses. At the same time, the Fed extends loans and guarantees to all their friends in the business and the banking community as well as other central banks. They are the most powerful branch of government, more powerful than the other three branches.
Well, here's the thing. There's a fundamental difference, right, in the way you approach this and the way members of the administration would approach it, like a Tim Geithner who was asked that more government action, not less, in times of an economic crisis is what you need. In other words, crises have become worse, whether it's a Great Depression or other crises in other countries over time, when the government doesn't act enough. That's the fundamental view he holds, and that's what he's operating on. I mean, he said as much today. Why, what's wrong with that from your point of view?
Well, it's just wrong because, Bernanke is a historian and is supposed to understand the Great Depression, but I think he understands it in exactly the opposite way, because Austrian free-market economists see that they did way too much. Started under Hoover, and Roosevelt continued it. If you compare it to the Depression of 1921, which was a consequence of the inflation of World War I, you would say, well, why did it only last a year? We don't even remember the Depression of 1921. Well, a lot of those Roosevelt are the Bernanke argument that, hey, listen, we shouldn't allow these banks to fail in the early 30s, or and you say that's wrong? Oh, absolutely, because it was the inflation by the Federal Reserve in the 1920s that created the bubble. So he says the solution to the inflation of the 20s is to reinflate again, and his argument is, well, the Fed just didn't inflate enough. Well, right now, he's working very, very hard to inflate, but there's a certain point when it becomes pushing on a string. Nothing happens. If people aren't ready, they want to hold back because the consumer is too much in debt. People need to quit spending. They need to work hard, pay down their debt. We need to reduce their taxes and reduce their regulation. After World War II, we finally got out of the Depression because we lowered spending by 2/3 and lowered taxes by 1/3. That's the kind of policy that we need now. So, Congressman, can I stop you there? The income tax right now.
Congressman, let me stop you there for a second, because as we're looking kind of back on history, a couple of our viewers want to look forward, and I do as well. Jack was asking, okay, so this is your point of view. How do you fix it moving forward? Is it impossible in the system that you're criticizing right now?
No, it's very possible to do what I just suggested. Cut spending and cut taxes and pay down debt. And you'll have a bad year. There's no magic to the pain and suffering that was brought on by the Fed over these many decades. Sure, everybody loves the boom, everybody hates the bust. And there was too much spending, too much borrowing, and too much money creation. So we're trying to solve the problem by doing exactly the same thing. And it doesn't work. It gets you out of a mild recession, and it blows the bubble bigger. But finally, when the big bubble bursts, You have to retract. You have to have a new system. And right now, there's not enough confidence in the dollar reserve standard. That's what we've been working with.
So you said, again, there's really no magic bullet here. If everyone kind of shored up their balance sheets, whether it's consumers or banks, then we'd have one bad year, but then we would recover. But what has been sold to the American public by media, and we can take responsibility of that as well, and by Washington, is that it wouldn't just be one bad year. We would be in a depression that we have never seen before. So do you fundamentally disagree with that prediction?
Oh, I sure do, because most of the comments that we do hear and most of the understanding here in Washington have all the individuals have studied Keynesian economics, and this is what they teach. They don't teach Austrian free market sound money economics, and that's the reason we are destined to prolong the agony. I mean, we've been in this now, I guess in '07, we're working on our second year, and there's been no improvement with trillions of dollars of credit and spending, and nothing is happening except the economy gets weaker. So people ought to wake up and start looking at the Austrian School of Economic Thought.
There are a lot
it's
of people.
Free markets. It's what makes America great.
There are a lot of people, Congressman, who do agree with you. We were getting messages on our board throughout the interview. Well, I'm with the congressman. I'm with Ron on this one. And then you obviously have this big following, as we remember from when you ran for president, certainly on the internet. What's an example in history in which that approach has worked to get us out of or to deal with a crisis? Not a slowdown, not slower economic growth, but an economic crisis. When has the Austrian school practically worked?
Well, I would say 1921, which I've already mentioned because it was mostly hands-off and we got over it rather quickly. But I would say the last part of the 19th century was a pretty good, tremendous economic growth, and prices gradually went down a little bit. But we're taught in school now that dropping prices means deflation. It's very dangerous. No, on sound money, free market economics, because of productivity, your dollar becomes more valuable and you become richer. Today, we are determined to make your dollar weaker because that's the only way they can pay off government debt, is to depreciate the currency, because we never can literally pay it in a nominal sense. We have to liquidate the debt through the depreciation of the dollar, because that's why Bernanke is praying for inflation, which means he's praying to destroy the wealth of savers. We want people to save their money. They want to have their money so when there is a problem and house prices should go down even more, then they can buy up the assets.
Just ask the question to our viewers, should Ron Paul run for president again? And have a couple people weighing in saying yes, absolutely. And one of the things that always comes from your interviews that surprises me is just how logical you are, which is just says, stop being in debt. Stop being, so in debt that you can't function. Just save. It seems so logical. Do you find down in Washington that it's just too logical for people to understand?
Yeah, well, I imagine that's why I don't fit in too well here in Washington. They haven't exactly held in high esteem people who were logical and made sense,
so
because it interferes with power.
So, right. Well, yeah. So how can you affect change?
Well, I try to affect it by doing what I've been doing for 30 years, talking about and voting a precise way to set a record and to try to set a standard. And I thought that's exactly where it would end, and not too many people would notice, and I hope maybe someday they would. In the last year or so, since I was in that presidential race, I found out there were more people out there that I ever dreamed of. And the young people are very, very interested in sound free market economics, and they're studying now and they're looking at it. They're going to the Mises Institute and they're getting the books and the literature, because they cannot find these answers in a public school because the government pays for the public school, so they have to teach government control, so they won't teach real, true free market economics.
What do you think the country's going to look like a year from now? I mean, how worried are you about the future? I mean, how bad could this get, in other words?
Well, my biggest worry is loss of liberty. And when you have economic chaos, they resort to taking away more liberty, just as they do when there's a hot military war going on, but people suffer from loss of liberty. So we are going to have less liberties in 1 year, and the country is going to be much poorer, and there'll be a higher unemployment rate. And then you're going to have price inflation. You're going to see the devaluation of the dollar, where it will translate into higher prices. So it doesn't look good as long as we continue to do what we're doing, but I'm optimistic that if we did the right things, which we're capable of if we get enough support, we can solve this problem rather quickly. And it's not all that complicated. Once again, it's pretty logical. Why don't we just obey the Constitution? And then we find all our answers there, because it's the disobeying of the Constitution. I mean, there's no authority for central banks in the Constitution. Why don't we open the books to the Federal Reserve? I have a bill to look at the Federal Reserve. Why don't we expose this fourth branch of government? Those kind of things would bring solutions rather quickly.